Well, hi everybody, it's Jeff Hopper with Jeff Cranford, and we are winding down our discussion on threads of righteousness. We've talked about many aspects of righteousness. We began with the singularity in terms of our worship of God. We've talked about humility and faithfulness and mercy and justice and generosity and purity and love, and now we're to one more, and that is that our righteousness must be Spirit-led. That there is really no way to live in righteousness, and you hinted at this in our discussion about love, apart from God, apart from the Spirit of God within us. But we've talked, Jeff, about the thread of righteousness running from the Old Testament into the New Testament, and I think sometimes there's this mistaken understanding among believers on the basis of Acts 2, the Holy Spirit coming upon the assembled believers in Jerusalem in Acts 2, thinking, well, that's when the Holy Spirit showed up, as though the Holy Spirit was never there before. But I know you love the Old Testament. Give us some examples of where the Spirit was operative in the Old Testament and leading people to righteousness.
Well, you know, I think the key difference in the two is that, and theologians maybe disagree on this a little bit, this is my take on it, but as I've studied this through the years, in the Old Testament, the Holy Spirit was certainly operative. The third person of the Godhead was not inoperative in the world, and it's obviously there at creation, and the Spirit was hovering over the waters, and it's all kinds of that. But what happened with the Holy Spirit in the Old Testament is He would come on people for power, but then you would see at times the Spirit would be removed. For instance, Saul, it said, as he was becoming king, the Spirit came on him and he became a different man. I mean, the Old Testament's clear. And then the Spirit departed, and actually it says that the Lord sent an evil spirit, and then he was plagued in his later life and his kingship, and it took David, now a Spirit-empowered guy, to come in and play the harp to allay some of his tension, and he was in misery. And so it was a very interesting. Samson, the power of the Holy Spirit would come on him for great power, and then it would retreat. It wasn't until Acts chapter 2 that the Holy Spirit, that propitiation, that atonement had been made. Jesus had brought the blood back before on the mercy seat in that heavenly scenario, and then the promise of the Spirit all the way back from Genesis 12 was then poured out for a permanent indwelling, which is radically different than a Spirit coming on for power but now indwelling us. And so now in 1 Thessalonians, for instance, it talks about don't grieve the Spirit of God. And so He's present with us. He's living on the inside. It's like the little kids thing, you know, invite Jesus into your heart. Well, that's not inaccurate. It's not Jesus in His flesh, obviously, but via the Holy Spirit, God's presence dwells within us permanently. And in doing so, wants to lead us into the most radical, exciting, profound experience. We were talking about this a little bit yesterday in our conversations. Experience with God. I want an experience with God. I don't want to just know some theological details about God. I want to experience His presence in my life. And so the Holy Spirit living is, and maybe we can talk about this in a little bit, I mean, I can't even imagine a life without direction, and yet people fear that a little bit because, well, I stay away from those people that say, well, God spoke to me and told me, and that's those crazies on TV that end up with some kind of cult, right? And yet we're totally dependent upon hearing His voice to be able to inaugurate the kingdom that He began 2,000 years ago on the cross.
Well, and I understand a little bit of that apprehension about, well, it's kind of those wackos that are into the Holy Spirit.
Certainly wackos,
but that is the other defining difference that came about in Acts 2, is this fulfillment of the prophecy to Joel that the Spirit would come on all people.
Mankind, that's right.
And so we do have in the Old Testament incidents where the Holy Spirit came on individual people through time, particularly kings and prophets through time, but now the Spirit's available to all. So that's what I do want to talk about next time, is how the Spirit is available to all of us to help us in our pursuit of righteousness.